2020, the United States Air Force and Space Force sponsored a Capture the Flag-style hacking competition designed to inspire the world's top cybersecurity talent to develop the skills necessary to help reduce vulnerabilities and build more secure space systems. The top 8 teams from our qualification round worked through a series of final event challenges. The teams vied for the chance to send their code to instruct an on-orbit satellite to take a picture of the moon. In 2021, Hackasat-2 featured a 24-hour attack-defense-style CTF with physical hardware called a FlatSat. Each team also had access to a digital twin where they could try out their commands in a simulated space environment. Once again, our final event has drawn the best hacking teams in the world to work through an attack and defend CTF. This time, the entire game takes place within digital twin technology, which provides the most realistic space environment yet. The simulation is designed to prepare teams for Hackasat-4, when the entire game will be hosted on an on-orbit satellite called Moonlighter. Moonlighter is designed specifically to help us all learn space faster through events like Hackasat. Everything is set. The top 8 teams are ready to go. The competition begins now.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for the Hackasat 3 Awards ceremony. Our competition has officially ended, and if you've been tuning in, a lot of interesting things have happened over the past 23 plus hours of CTF gameplay. Later, we're going to get into more technical details of how the competition progressed.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. This has been a really exciting competition that has showed how skilled and creative the competitors are. Later, what we're going to do is we're going to bring you back in with Jordan, who's going to give you a deep analysis of the gameplay with some of our designers. It's something you're not going to miss. It's going to be a fireside chat with the Cromulence team, and we're calling that Between Two Antennas, and that's if they're still awake by now, honestly. But first, we're going to bring in an honored guest. And something you're not going to want to miss either. This is Jeff Moss, a.k.a. Dark Tangent, the founder of Defcon. He's going to help us announce the winners of this year's competition. Jeff, are you there right now?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Awesome. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us for the second year Hackasat 3. We've been on this journey with Defcon and the Aerospace Village for 3 years now, and we've learned a lot. What's your perspective on the growth of the Aerospace Village and Defcon in general?
Yeah, so Defcon, we just had our 30th anniversary, and we grow organically year on year. And, the Aerospace Village has turned into one of our largest villages in only 3 years. And I think that's for a number of reasons. One is probably because it was always considered kind of taboo or forbidden or hard to get your hands on the gear. And all it took was you guys and other villages to show up. Drone Village was an early one with the gear. And next thing you know, it's taken off, right? You've got airplanes, satellites, drones, ships, and I think that ignites everybody's imagination, and it gives them something cool to hack on. So yeah, congratulations, guys! It's been going fantastic.
No, absolutely, Jeff. I appreciate it. So I've only been on the team for about 2 years now. So I do want to wind it back a little bit. I'm curious, when you were first approached with this Hackasat idea, what was the first thoughts to your head?
Yeah.
Did you think we'd be here today and make it this far?
No, I thought it was a brilliant idea, and I thought it was really kind of forward thinking for the Air Force and Defense Digital Services to want to launch something and engage with the community. But I was a little skeptical because normally government ideas don't last this long. And so it is really a testament that you're actually still here and you're zeroing in, doing exactly what it is you said you would do. So, actually pretty impressed. Good job, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks for that. We really appreciate it. It's kind of a trip down memory lane when you mention the organizations that started it all, and the fact that it's an ode to, we asked you, we wanted to collaborate with you, and we did what we said we were going to do. And it's certainly been a roller coaster ride, and we're not even done yet, because next year we're gonna start from scratch in Vegas at DEFCON 31, because we're doing an on-orbit CTF. But no pressure. But you heard about Moonlighter, right? And do you think you guys are ready for an on-orbit CTF?
We've got this huge parking structure where you can put the largest antenna in the world out there. You can do whatever you want. So we have high expectations for you guys. Plus, everybody can't believe this is actually happening. It really is impressive. So Yeah, don't fuck
Awesome.
it up.
That's great.
We won't, trust me. So, kind of like Defcon, Hackasat, our mission is to impact the world as a community, bring space and cybersecurity together, and really build that community. What are some of the positive impacts that, in retrospect, looking at DEF CON over the years, that you are most proud of, per se? When it comes
That's
to
a pretty
when it
good
comes to
question,
influence as
'cause,
well. Sorry.
Yeah, because when we started, it wasn't meant to be influence or change the world. It was meant to be a party for hackers. But as time's gone on and it evolved, it really actually turned out to be quite influential. And I'd love to say that was part of my master plan, but it was pretty much accidental, and then us just making sure to keep it going. So, for example, when we started DEF CON, there was like maybe 3 other hacking conferences in the United States, and they were all invite only. So when I launched DEF CON, I didn't like that, right? Because I wasn't invited to some of them. So I made DEF CON open to everyone. Now, in retrospect, that was a brilliant move, but I wasn't thinking that at the time, right? I was just thinking I want a party that I and my friends can go to that don't have to know the secret password to get in. And so now there's thousands of hacking conferences around the world. There's access to information like never before. And if I have to pick something in recent history, I would say the voting village, vote hacking village, is kind of similar to the aerospace village in the sense that everybody said that voting machines, you couldn't hack them, you couldn't find them, you couldn't even test them, the requirements, the laws. And then we found the machines on eBay. We hacked them in 3 days, just showing the world what hackers could do when accessing the technology. And it changed how certain states and countries vote, what kind of equipment they use. It really changed the narrative. So what I'm hoping is, with Hackasat, you're going to do the exact same thing. Here's what hackers can do going from 0 to 100 miles an hour. They haven't really been exposed to this technology, but look what they've discovered. Look at how they've repurposed it. And that is going to fundamentally change the conversation around satellites, microsat, communications, whatever it is, right? And we get to be right in the middle of it, watching some of the world's smartest people and teams tear this stuff apart. And I'd say that's probably the biggest change.
Thanks for that, Jeff. And I think it's a great way of saying some of the best things evolve into something that they originally were started for something totally different. And I think it's a big testament to what you've done with DEF CON, and we thank you for that. But now onto some other fun stuff. Without further delay, we would be honored if you could announce our podium winners for this year's contest. So take it away with our 3rd place finisher.
Do I get to announce the cash prizes?
Please,
Certainly.
Please do.
Okay, here we go. So this year, top 3 teams. In 3rd place, we have Solar Wine winning the prize of $20,000.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Jeff. All right, let's go ahead. Let's hear who has 2nd place this year.
2nd place this year goes to Space Bits R Us, winning $30,000.
All right, so that was 2nd place. So Jeff, over to you for our 1st place winner of the Hackasat 3 final event.
My honor to announce the 1st place winner as Poland Can into space for $50,000 American dollars. Take it away. Congratulations, guys. You really hit a home run.
All right, wow, Jeff. We really appreciate you coming in to help us crown our Hackasat 3 winners for this year. What we're going to do is take a last look at our final Hackasat 3 podium here.
Congratulations to our winners for a hard-fought win. So now we're going to bring on Jordan, our resident CTF expert. I know we say that all the time, but he really is, to tell us what happened in the game.
Alrighty, so congratulations first of all to all the teams. It's been really fantastic watching them this whole weekend. This is certainly the most exciting Hackasat. I've been here for all three of them, and this was a blast. Very well done. Every one of these teams here has shown amazing progress, has done a lot of good work. Let's watch back a sort of animation that we've been showing you a little bit of the scoreboard. We'll do it here on the computer, and we'll see what these scores look like throughout this entire weekend event. All right, so that was, yeah, just the craziness of the last few days. We have that one little break that we had overnight for all the teams and the competition organizers, but you can see it was wild and crazy yesterday. It settled out a little bit today, but we still saw a whole lot of really interesting game events happening. So I'm going to kind of briefly summarize what happened here as if this were like an update where we weren't going behind the scenes, and then we're going to step back and really take off the covers, talk to the competition team, and talk about some of the best moments from behind the scenes, dig into some of these challenges in a little bit more detail. So obviously you can tell, and as we've already announced, Poland Canada Space, fantastic job. They maintained a lead going into the end of yesterday, and they never let it up. They kept their foot on the gas with a number of important solves. So we saw them earlier with their science solves that landed before the earlier broadcast. Their lead did shrink a little bit as we saw some fantastic play from Space Bits. They were really like on track. If they had landed maybe a couple more of the science missions or one or two other challenges, it was possible for them to kind of make a play for that first place. More importantly, we saw them make a pretty big jump over Solar Wine, who again was our winner in the past years. So this second place finish was really, really nice work from Space Bits because as again, you can look at these slopes. So as we've talked about before, two different types of points you can get in the game. The sort of instantaneous, you solve the challenge points, but then what do you do with that access? What do you do with the thing that you've solved, and can you use that to improve your SLA? And the SLA is represented there by the slope of these lines. So as they angle up or flatter, that's them really doing it. I also have to highlight, of course, we dogged on a Samurai a little bit earlier. We were talking yesterday about how they were going to do, where they're going to make it back in from that last base finish. But sure enough, we saw them land on those other ground stations and jump right back up where their SLA had them back up in the mix. In fact, I think even briefly, it doesn't look like it here, but briefly they were in the fourth place slot, although the lower SLA by the end of the day had dropped them back out into sixth. Behind both the organizers and the single event upset there. So, but again, all of these teams solved a number of challenges. They were all really, really active. It was super exciting to see. Let's get to the fun stuff. We're going to go ahead and bring in the competition event, and we're going to have our between two antennas casual conversation here. As always, of course, to the production team on this fantastic graphics. It's really a kick watching them put this stuff together. So we've got the competition team here with us now. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining us. Really excited to talk about what y'all have done. And I'm glad you're not asleep yet. So thanks, thanks for that. I know you're all going to be looking forward to it. It wasn't as bad maybe as last year where it went straight through. Before actually we ask you all to talk about anything, let's go to the computer real quick. I actually want to bring up a map, and we're going to use this map to sort of show all of the challenges, the gameplay, and this is kind of a view of the game that we couldn't show during the event because the teams, it gives a little too much information about with the flow of the challenges from the team. So you can see here we've got the this flow of challenges from the top down. It started with these kind of the basics of the antenna pointing, the radio settings, the PID or ADCS challenge, which is really just your movement and control of the orientation. But these are all, of course, related. You need to have these things done to move on to these other challenges. And then, of course, there were the systems that were on the ground. We've got the web server, the FTP server. We had the ground stations that they had to have access to be able to get communications from more than just the polars. So all these things are kind of related. You guys have been hard at work putting all these together. We're going to go ahead and talk about some of these challenges, but we're also going to talk about your favorite moments. So back to the team here. Did you draw straws? Did anybody who's it looks like Bryce, you're first up with the mic. So first, general feelings. What are you excited about? What are you glad to have seen?
So I won't open with I'm glad it's over. Or did I? My favorite moment was probably in round 189 when both Poland Cannon to Space and Solar Wine got Poland's token for the 3-app Monty. Got a few questions about, how did we only get 50 points for that token? Well, it's shared. Excellent.
Okay, so let's pull up the diagram here, and we can talk about 3-app Monty. So this was an application here, and this is one of the challenge authors who's not here with us, right? So again, this isn't even the entire team. You've got a couple more folks who were working on challenges that aren't here at the final event. But this app, and I'll briefly summarize it, y'all correct me, but this was essentially a challenge about understanding the state between 3 different applications. So it's a little bit like a Crack Me, but where the shared state is between these 3 different applications, and it's about working kind of between them. So tell me though, Bryce, you said it was shared. So that's when anyone scores on a particular token. This is normal like in a regular CTF, right? Like if 2 teams score against the same one, you're dividing the points that you've stolen. How were these points shared? Do we know what the teams did?
I don't know exactly how the team's attack worked. This is such a vast and complex game. I don't have a full view of everything that happens in the system. I mostly worked on scoring though, and I do get to see every single flag or token that gets submitted, and I do get to see how they get scored in the actual game. So this was we called it a scavenger challenge. And how these worked were you could grab tokens from anybody. You could grab them from your own satellite. You could grab them from your opponents. And everybody who redeemed those tokens before they, expired would share the 100 points that it gave you.
Excellent. And this sounds like then are these tokens that cycle over time? Are these change, or are these just a one-time bundle that you would get?
You're correct. The scavenger tokens do expire after, I think, 3 or 4 rounds.
Excellent. Yeah, so I really like the mix. You had a lot of challenges that were kind of one-off, a lot of challenges that you had to maintain. Of course, SLA was the constant and super important throughout the entirety. I think that adds a lot of texture to this game that was super interesting. And I think last year we had some of those elements. We had the SLA that they cared about, but I think that sort of breadth of challenges was what was fantastic. Do I get to pick who goes next, or do you know amongst you who might be next up on the block? Let's go back to or let's talk about kind of the earlier challenges. So we've got any one of Logan, Mike, or Mark. Y'all worked on the sort of SLA services. You've got the antenna pointing, you've got the radio settings, you've got the PID settings. So who wants to take one of those? We'll give it to Mark. Okay, so Mark is gonna come over for some of these. Mark, I'm gonna ask you about the antenna pointing. Right, we saw a lot of that kind of in the game. Were there any surprises? Do you feel like the team? It seemed like certainly by the end, most, if not all, of the teams really had a grasp on how important that was, how to work with it. They were able to track. They were able to do those communications.
Yeah, so antenna pointing was a big change this year. Last year, you had complete 100% access to your spacecraft the whole time. This year, you had to point antennas. You had to figure out when the spacecraft was going to be over certain parts of the Earth and where ground stations were that'd be able to access the spacecraft during those times. So that was a lot of extra complication this year that we basically put on the teams to have to deal with. And for us, one of the most exciting things that I was looking forward to at the start of the game was the first Svalbard contact. So we started the teams off, and then about 20 minutes into the game, they're coming over Svalbard, and each team had their own dedicated ground station there. So we had all 8 teams, and then we're looking for, all right, are they going to start pointing? How are they going to do?
Yeah.
Have they been using their digital twin and practicing making antenna pointing scripts? And that first Svalbard contact was rough. We didn't see a lot of antenna pointing. We saw some manual pointing. And that could have been for a number of things. They could have still been trying to get their tooling set up, trying to attach into the infrastructure, those sorts of things. And then as the game progressed, we started seeing all of our antenna pointing codes just pointing all over the place, and the antenna just getting better and better over time. For a while, it was like maybe 2 or 3 teams were doing really good pointing. And then by the end of the game, we had all the teams, all the antenna beams were tracking spot on. So by the end of the game here, everyone became an antenna pointing expert.
That's fantastic, and that's really one of the main goals, right? We'd love to see people figuring this stuff out. I'm sure it started for several of those teams as you said, manual pointing, and then they're slowly automating it and getting it more and more accurate.
Yep.
Let's pass it over actually to Mike, because Mike, I know you wanted to talk about some of the PID stuff, right? So this was one of the things you were excited about, and the settings changes and how they controlled it. We talked a little bit about this that on an earlier stream, but tell me more about kind of how this mattered, how this impacted teams pointing, how this impacted their SLA, and maybe even a brief summary in case the audience didn't get what a PID was earlier.
Yeah, of course. So our satellites are controlled by reaction wheels, which work based on conservation of angular momentum. So you turn the wheel one way and your satellite will turn the other. And those wheels are controlled by a control law called a proportional integral derivative controller, or PID. And those controllers have 3 settings, one constant for each of those terms, that are then added together to calculate, what you want to do to the wheel to control it. And my college professors would be mad at me, but I gave the team some pretty nasty constants initially.
They weren't totally broken, right?
They weren't totally broken, but if you used them, as is, you would usually break SLA if you tried to do anything like point just about anywhere except not moving. So we saw one of the teams got it really, really, really good, and by the end of the game, every time they moved, they stayed right under the SLA limits. And I mean, we were looking at their pointing angles, and they just looked nice and smooth at the transition. They really tuned the controller really well. But more excitingly, one of the teams, right when sort of things got crazy yesterday, they said, we have access to everybody's satellite, and we're going to change all their settings to a really high value. And they spun out all the satellites they controlled, maxed out their reaction wheels, spun them into safe mode, and then as that went on, they actually blew up the integrators in the controller and crashed their flight software. So
now, and this brings up a great topic, which is the sort of like, how much is too much? What counts as the denial of service? And this is a really tough issue for any CTF. And I think it's especially so here, where it's these really complex systems. And I know y'all, I was kind of on the periphery listening to a lot of these conversations about what's allowed and what's not. And I think there's 2 kind of important characteristics that had to be upheld. One is you want to be consistent, right? Then when you make a decision, you stick with it, so every team gets the same consistent answer about what their behavior is. And then 2, you want to be able to maintain the game, right? If you make a decision earlier on that allows the game to be flatlined or denial of service entirely, well then you might have to walk it back, even though that's breaking your consistency. So it seems like those are 2 kind of competing things. It seems like there were some questions. I heard teams asking. I mean, it sounds like that was even one of those that teams asked about, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Right after that happened, one of the teams said, like, "Wait, we're allowed to throw commands at other satellites, and
the
do
light
things
bulb
like
went
that."
off. Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh, okay." Yeah, it came on, and then we saw other teams do that. And even towards the end of the game, we saw, then before the pause yesterday, we saw people, teams besides the first team to throw the attack start throwing attacks at other satellites. And it was really cool. Mark was talking about the pointing. You could see when one team just points their antenna and throws an attack like that at another satellite.
So let's talk about those attacks and those defenses. If there's somebody else that you want to pass off to, if you want to take it, y'all decide based on the question. But this attacks and these defenses, right? So if I'm one of my first questions when y'all were describing this to me was, okay, if I'm a team, what's perfect play look like? How do I protect like if it's just my satellite's out of control, can I keep people from accessing it? Do I, on a normal server, I'm just changing my passwords. But here it's a little more complicated, right? Because we've got the antenna settings, we've got access. There's a lot of these components together. So how did the teams react? Did we see teams really defend themselves well? What did that look like?
Yeah, so one of the ways you could defend yourself in this game is by realizing, and I think a lot of teams realize this, that the radio settings for the ground station were leaked, and they were leaked at a certain rate. So we saw teams that really realized this, hitting that leak all the time, saying, what are all the ground station settings in the game so that I know what everybody is doing. And you could solve this by rotating your settings. So if you use your ground radio to talk to your satellite, the next thing you should do is immediately change your settings on the satellite so that they're not that. and then change your ground station to something that isn't your radio.
Just
right?
anything
So,
bogus. You want
yeah.
something that no one could use to talk to your satellite. Yeah.
Or you could throw chaff into the game and start just changing your ground stations at random
Every
so
time you
people
send a
don't
message.
understand,
Yeah.
but just not what your satellite is. The last thing you should always do when you're making contact with your satellite is change the radio settings to something only you know.
Yeah.
And then make sure that nobody else can find
And then
it.
make sure that the things you've changed it to is not what you've left
Yeah.
in the ground station, because the
Yeah.
ground station is basically the leak there.
The leak.
And yeah, I did. It sounded like some teams got that, and it was available to all the teams.
Yeah,
right?
there were a couple teams that really understood this mechanic and
Yeah.
executed it almost to perfection. And you saw those teams, not really get attacked very often because they were able to defend so well. And then they went and scored more points.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to go ahead and pull up on the computer the chart there, because I think we can shout out. Oh, if I can find it, we can shout out a couple of those teams, because really I would say just looking at the graphs, like in the back half of the event, Space Bits or Us, for example, didn't seem to ever really get knocked by a lot of these sort of SLA hits that other teams do. So whereas you would see like a flat line a little bit here for SolarWine, for example, where their graph kind of goes flat, you can see even Polling Can later today, their graph is a little bit flatter. So these are teams who, for whatever reason, maybe this or maybe other ones, had lower SLA scores, and so they're being impacted. But the ones that kind of kept that higher angle on their slope, those are the ones that were able to do it. And whether that's because they were doing this changing of the settings or whatever they were doing, we still have to dig in. It's going to be a while. I think we'll have to talk to the teams and figure out some of this stuff. But I was excited, and I think it was perfect that like a lot of these things that you hypothesized happened, that the teams were able to react and defend against it. But there were a couple that weren't maybe done. And before we leave you, Mike, one of the ones I know that you worked on was if I go back to my diagram here, you can find it. There was an exploit. There was these science missions that we've talked about earlier, right? And the science missions had you downlinking or uplinking, getting a mission, going and executing that mission, pointing on target, and then downlinking your data back. There was one thing that we didn't see that we were really curious if any of the teams would figure out if they were make use of. Do you want to kind of describe what that scenario was?
Yeah, we baked an exploit into the Telescope app that did the science mission for you and processed, handling the missions and then handing you down the exposures you got. And it was a buffer overflow based on pointer math type confusion. And we do know now that a couple teams did get this, but didn't get a chance to throw it. But if you did that, you could use return-oriented programming to basically do a lot more on the system and even steal other teams' science missions.
Yeah, so I thought that was a really cool idea. It was one of the hardest exploits, and so we've got this both labeled as the science mission exploit. If we go back to our graphic on the computer, we can see the science mission exploit is one of the hypothesized payloads that we might have seen. And the particular exploit there, which I think is fascinating, is you could have gotten other teams to execute science missions for you, to give you the points for a science mission, which would have been like a little Trojan horse. It would have been like super interesting. So just be on the lookout, teams, for clever ideas to use. In the next year, look for ways that you can use these payloads. And then, of course, if we see it here, this was the Risk V Business service was the name that we called it, and that was also a little bit of a hand grenade or like a strong. It was a strong thing. I know y'all were a little concerned about once they get access to that, if teams had landed it, could have caused a lot of mayhem, could have done a lot of other stuff, and we were hoping if it happened, it was towards the end of the game. I think it didn't quite happen, although it sounded like maybe Poland Cam was real close to that. And maybe chose not to because they weren't sure if it was going to be, if it would cause other issues or not. And they figured, we've got this one in the bag. We think we're okay. And obviously they won, so you can't fault the logic. But it would have been cool to see. It was a lot of neat stuff that could have happened. But it was also would have opened sort of a new phase in gameplay. Okay, so anybody else wants to volunteer with ideas or things that they've talked about or missed? Or I'll pick one at random. If not, I've got a couple people I could go with.
Yeah, sure. So one of the other big things that we did this year was, try and bring realism into the game. I know last year, everybody talks about, at least for this year's Hackasat was, learn space faster. So, trying to get the realism in the game, closer and closer to what, real satellite ops are. Half of the team here, our background's in aerospace engineering. We're not necessarily vulnerability researchers and stuff like that. We don't necessarily, write, software exploits for our jobs, but we've learned a lot and built a very, very complicated system. I know all of you guys were able to see that. And then the other thing, I mean, we, the whole team worked very, very hard to put all this together. Working long hours, over the last couple of weeks to get this thing put together and working, getting all these challenges integrated, getting this whole infrastructure stood up so you guys could play, and it's really good. The other thing, we have, we had all these servers, and we saw teams, ask us, oh, are these services part of the game? Well, some teams found some of our administrative interfaces. We're not like network security experts. We do our best to cover ourselves up, but we definitely missed a couple things there.
Pop a root
And
shell
we'll
on your
take
boxes?
we'll take credit for that. It happens, but thanks for asking us. We always appreciate that. You don't just pwn our infrastructure and break the game for everybody.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's a good point. Again, several of the teams had ideas. They're like, is this within bounds? And it's easy to ask. I think you all had great communication with teams in your private channels. And so, somebody would say, is this in bounds? And you're like, yeah, that is within the rules. Like, have at it. And some chaos ensued. And then sometimes a team would ask and you'd be like, oh, no, that is definitely not intended, or that is considered denial of service, or that's out of scope. And so I know there may have been teams who maybe felt like things were a little chaotic and they were getting beat up a little bit. But trust me, not everything went your way. There were some things that were like vetoed and that were considered out of scope, and they didn't get thrust on you. So I think you all did a great job of kind of walking that line from what I saw.
Yeah, the other thing, like operating satellites like this is not trivial, right? So even building all this logic to automate your contacts and stuff, it's really cool to see some of the actions that these teams were taking to be able to go through these contacts, changing their radio settings, going through and automating all this activity. It's super cool because there's in real satellite ops, people spend huge amounts of money and time building this kind of capability, and we saw these teams put together this stuff and do some complicated things over the course of a 30-hour game. So that was really exciting for us to see what sort of gamesmanship would come up in such a short period of time. And as things get more complicated, the realism's really cool, but as it gets more realistic, it also just gets more and more complicated. Yeah. So it's difficult as the designers to come up with all a complicated enough game to be interesting, but keep things simple enough that the game's actually playable. And I think we were really happy with that. All the gameplay that happened that made it very interesting, and none of our assumptions got really broken in terms of the way that people would play. And that's a real big shout out to the team for putting together such an interesting system and making this happen. Yeah, you give people too much freedom and it's too easy to break. It's too easy to find kind of like one exploit that solves everything, and you give them too little and it's a boring fixed game. And I agree. I think you walked that line super well. Yeah, and we had a couple cases where we had to pull things out of the game because where they just maybe not fundamentally broke things, but made it so complicated and bogged the data streams down so much that we couldn't even keep up with the amount of data we were generating. And at the end of the day, we had to make sure that we could keep performance fast enough that time would step close enough to real time. Because if we got behind, things would would I don't want to be here till tomorrow. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, I'd love to look at some of these challenges, maybe in a little bit more depth for some of our folks. Steve, maybe if you want to take the mic, you were the challenge author of the 403 Forbidden. All right. The web server challenge, and I'll pull that up here on screen, and maybe you can describe to me a little bit about what that challenge is, where it fit into the gameplay.
Sure. Well, if you remember from the diagram you showed, there was a flow of dependencies where you had to solve one challenge to get to another, then to get to others. And so the web server challenge in particular was one of those very early challenges. Yep. And until you solved it, there were a lot of other things you just could not do. You couldn't do the pointing exercises. You couldn't do the science missions. You couldn't get to the FTP server and get the flight software. So it was important that this challenge was not only robust, but not super hard. Yeah, because we didn't want to bog the game down, right? Yeah. So this one had a very simple call to system, right? And we figured, and it also very trivially, had a directory traversal, so teams could then leak the binary itself back to them. So the thought was, very quickly you're going to see this call to system, see the path, how they got what few mitigations there were to keep them from doing a command injection. And I think all teams except for one actually solved it, which was great. So and the service itself also became then a big part of the game's automation, because they were constantly having to poll the web server to get access to all the changing ground station. Yeah, we talked about those ground station leaks. This is the thing that gated it, so that makes sense. You've got to not just do it once, but you've got to build it into your automation to
get those fresh keys so you can be attacking everybody.
So, I was obviously freaking out like, oh gosh, are they going to crash the web server? It wasn't meant to crash, because if it crashes, then everyone loses everything. So,
yes. Yeah, and this is a good point too, where you kind of want to walk the balance between too easy, too hard. If you make this one too hard, you've just ruined later. Save your hard challenges for later, and I think that was well done. You did exactly that, and so the difficulty definitely ramped up. The difficulty wasn't always smooth though. You don't always predict, and sometimes there's unintended ones.
Well, and I can say the next challenge in that chain was the FTP server. I didn't create that challenge, but I kind of it's adopted father because the person who wrote it wasn't here.
Yeah.
And so it became the next one in the chain, and because it's also a gateway to the next challenges. It turns out maybe it was a little harder than we anticipated.
Yeah.
There was a little drama there at the very end, right before the pause last night, that only one team had solved it and had used it to get access to the flight software binaries.
Yeah, so Poland Can had it yesterday evening before the game was down, and that was only one so far.
And we were like, oh wow, they're going to have just all night with these binaries, and no one else is going to have a chance at it, and they're going to come up tomorrow and just pwn everybody. And literally 10 minutes before we paused the game, one of the team, SolarWine, popped it, and then we're watching because we can see the logs of what they're doing, oh, they got the flag, yay, and we're cheering, they got the flag. Okay, well, they got to get the binaries. And there's nothing happening. And the clock is ticking, and we're all like, oh gosh, and we can't give them a hint. That wouldn't be fair.
Yep. Once
and
it's
then
been done.
We're counting down, and we're like, okay, only a few minutes, guys, left. Wrap up your stuff, And so sure enough, then we started seeing the script running where they were starting to pull the flight software, and they got it all right before we shut the game down.
Yeah, and so again, if I go back to that the diagram, we can see that actually that FTP service, the 150 file status, gated all these other binaries that they were able to reverse engineer and get access to. Puzzlebox, 3-App and so that really is which is why you can see here both Poland Can and SolarWine solved Puzzlebox. As well as Poland got 3-App as this is the first solve. There were other teams that kind of got them. I think somebody pointed out to me though that the first solve here was 40 seconds apart on Puzzlebox, at least at one point in the logs of the flag. So I don't know if it was one of the other folks I think that saw this and mentioned it. So we've kind of dual-headed them as joint first bloods on that one because they were so close. But yeah, that was fun. I missed it. I was out unfortunately eating when I came back. I heard that was. I think it's one of the high points. Any other kind of exciting moments that y'all were just like, oh man, I really was hoping to see this and we did, or nick of time moments that you guys wanted to call out before we talk about some other things? No pressure if you don't.
No, Jason.
For me, actually, it was interesting to see the visualization and then to hear about the teams when at one point our visualization went down. And the number of teams that were really were really upset about it.
They were using it, yeah.
We internally were trying to understand, were the teams actually pointing with the visualization? Were they relying on it? Or, what mechanisms were they using? So that was definitely something that I found really interesting. And then another thing that was really interesting to me was just how good of a job this team did at architecting, the simulation framework, that it held up as well as it did. And I think the Time Lord, keeping a game clock in sync, in real time, is very impressive, for such a complex system. So hats off to the team for everything that they did.
Components. I think unless people have written kind of emulation or simulation environments, they don't understand how impressive that is exactly. To be able to have that many separate systems on different pieces of machinery, different services, all working in this virtual environment. And we said digital twin in years past, and we meant a single satellite, and that's your digital twin was an entire universe.
Yeah, this is an entire constellation of flight software, ground station components, simulation, physics, everything all in one. I don't know. I asked the guys how many services are running, and they said it's over 60 or something like that. So I was just, absolutely impressed.
Yeah, yeah, that was a great word. All right, so I know there was somebody who mentioned, I'm trying to remember who it was I was talking to, that there was actually some logic behind turning off safe mode. Who's a good person to explain the logic of that? Because that was something that explain a little bit about what safe mode was, why would you want to turn it off, and how that worked out.
Yeah, so I think we saw this in multiple ways. Teams eventually figured out that they could turn off any of the apps running in their flight software. There's a command to the app executor that just says turn off the app, and we saw app off as both an attack that people were throwing against other teams, just turn off all apps, but also safe mode. If you didn't talk to it every 70 seconds, it would be it would put you in safe mode, and then it would go fix you for a little while, and you'd basically lose the ability to do what you wanted.
So yeah, just for context, this is kind of mirroring like real satellite operations things, right? Where there's maybe like a recovery or a watchdog or something that would just, if some ability to, like, if things have gotten corrupted or messed up, reset, come back online, reconnect, so you can continue.
If you don't have enough battery, safe mode is like, hey, I have to point at the sun now.
Shutting off all of the processes. I'm going to charge up.
If it hasn't heard from you in a while, it's like, maybe I should go back to default so you can find me, that sort of things. But, that can be very annoying. We made them send a specific message to say stay out of safe mode. And some teams' response was, every time I communicate, I will send that message. And other teams' response was just like, whatever, I don't really want to deal with safe mode. I'm just going to turn it off and trust that I can control my own satellite.
So that makes sense. If a team was sort of really good about watching all their parameters, they were really good about like maintaining operations themselves, they might even be able to push it outside the bounds. Like safe mode had like sort of safe bounds, but then there's the actual operating bounds what they could get away with. And so I think it's sort of like a cartooner, right? Like who's like, yeah, I know that the stock engine RPM limit's this, but now I can go up above that. And so they're able to take a little bit further.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I thought that was a really, really exciting thing when you mentioned that to me, that teams had like knowingly done that. And then also it was used as an attack against others, was really cool too.
Yeah, the safe mode piece reminded me of one pretty cool tactic we saw, or it seemed to be the tactic. So when Poland was sending up commands to the other spacecraft, part of the tactic was to actually turn off safe mode. And I think initially, so the attacks when taking out the other spacecraft was crashing the flight software. And that wasn't necessarily the optimal strategy points-wise. So you didn't necessarily want to knock out the flight software. You want to minimize their SLA relative to the SLA that you're earning. So you want to put their batteries in a bad state. You want to prevent them from downlinking bytes. You want to cause them to spin. You want to spin their reaction wheels in a bad way. So those are things that you would lose SLA points for if you weren't maintaining those correctly.
So in fact, I think Poland Can in particular actually had their flight software crash toward the end, right? But they were like, our SLA is not bad. Let's just let this go. It wasn't worth it to them. Now, if instead their software had crashed when things were in the tank, maybe then it would have been more imperative to actually fix it.
Right. They're actually kind of in a safe state at that point, or a safer state where their flight software was off, and okay, well, no one can mess with my flight software right now, and for a while I can coast with these SLA settings and be okay. So in the attacks, safe mode was an important part of that. So disable safe mode so that I can spin up these other spacecraft and it won't try and rescue them, and I can get their tumble rates higher, and I can put I can lower their battery further. So I thought that was a really creative tactic that they discovered.
That was cool. And again, all of that kind of interacted with those communication parameters. Teams could try to defend against it. We saw varying levels of success of that. And it was really fun watching teams respond in different ways, I think, and try to, some of them kind of realize what was going on. Some of them are just thinking there's bugs. And it is really hard, I think, playing a CTF. The fog of war and the confusion of not having perfect information. Even here, y'all had incredible amounts of telemetry, the data you're gathering and the logs and the information, but there's times like, well, we think this is happening, but we're not totally sure because we don't have perfect information, and it makes it hard.
Yeah, and actually, when that situation happened, the spacecraft started going down, and from our perspective, or at least for me, I was starting to worry. I was like, oh, why are the satellites are going down? Is something wrong in the infrastructure? Kind of completely forgetting that our whole intent was that at some point we want them to be attacking each other, and someone was actually pulling off an attack. So there was this initial panic, and then that kind of turned into, oh wait, someone did the throw and took out everyone simultaneously. Then it was like this really fun moment where we're kind of discovering what's happening as we kind of digged into it.
Yeah, I love that. I think there was several of those moments where you're not sure if it's something really cool a team has done or just something bad that happened here, and you've got to kind of sort that out. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, kind of continuing on that, like the first throw against the ground stations was super exciting. We're going along, and all of a sudden, a team throws an exploit at all of the, I think it was the DES encryption challenge ground stations, which they got, they exploited a vulnerability in that challenge that was not intended, but, it worked, and they're able to throw it against all of them at once. And, with the visualization, we could see the logo of that team light up on the visualization for like 6 of them all at 1 second. It's just like, oh, wow, somebody just went hard and, was able to make a huge amount of points. And that was super exciting to see. Before that, we weren't sure when people were going to, do that. And we definitely didn't expect them to do it all against all of them, at the exact same time, pretty much.
Yeah, usually I thought that was really interesting too, because usually as a CTF player, oftentimes you'll see somebody like practice it, test the throw of it, and ironically, in hindsight, Poland Cam might have had a more optimal play if they would have spaced those out, only because they could have used those ground controls maybe differently. But I think that was really too early in the game. Most teams hadn't worked out how to leverage the ground stations, and they weren't exercising some of the other later components. So it may not have mattered, but it sure looked super impressive when they just dropped a huge chunk of points.
Yeah, I mean, by dropping that all at once, they locked themselves out of those ground stations until somebody else either took it over or an hour passed.
Yeah,
so it wasn't necessarily optimal, but as game designers, that's super exciting to see. When somebody goes big like that all at one time.
Excellent. All right, so you mentioned actually an unintended solution to a DES challenge. If you pass it over to Jason, he and I talked over this a little bit briefly. I'm going to pull up my computer as well, and we'll kind of walk through this a little bit, right? So if I've got the Orig DES, I think was the binary that we needed to be in.
That was the name of the binary, yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not the challenge offer for this. It was HJ and Dylan, so shout out to them.
Okay, so congrats. Yeah, congrats on them. Good work in the challenge. But see, I'm poking around. I'm trying to remember the offset. Do you have
I do. So basically, it was 8208, I think, and it was 0x2010 offset. This was the solve actually that I believe it was Poland actually shared with us. But the original designer of this challenge intended for, so basically they get the ability to set 1 byte in this binary. So they can set 1 byte anywhere in this binary to any value that they choose. And then it'll encrypt their key file for their ground station with DES encryption. And so they can disrupt this DES encryption software here with that 1 byte and change its behavior.
There's a lot of stuff you can do with 1 byte.
Yeah, it's 1 byte. It's just one single
stuff,
byte. You get to write it anywhere in this ELF file. And our challenge author decided to write the number of rounds of the DES encryption. And so,
basically weaken the encryption,
weaken the
brute force it. Yeah.
But there was an alternative simple mechanism that you could do actually.
So let me walk through it a little bit here. I've got this on screen. So we've got, if we look here, and this is just the original binary as the team's got it. So we've got the encrypt, and we can actually see this is the key or the flag that we've got here on the encryption.
It would be the key, but I guess you could consider it.
Call it either way the flag. It was the information you needed to extract out.
Right.
So there's the key. I'm just calling that the key because it's the parameter here.
Mm-hmm.
But then later on, there's the answer where we're writing back the encrypted value.
Yep. So that's writing it over that socket FD. So that'd be sending the data back to the team that's connected to that.
But like,
service.
what if I don't want the encrypted? What if I want the
you got 1 byte,
key
right?
instead?
So you use it wisely.
Yeah. So can we do that? And so I think you said that if I go, in fact, you said that offset earlier. It was that 2010.
Yes.
Actually, that's the disassembly. We can switch over into the hex view.
And so I believe that value is currently 0x58. And let's change it to 48.
Oh, okay. Let's change it to 48.
Let's see what happens.
Let's unlock it for editing. Remember to click the lock there. So if I change this one to 48, oh wait, something just changed here. Hold on, now that right is writing.
That was
a
a really powerful byte, wasn't it?
Look at that, one really good byte. Yeah, exactly.
Good job.
So good work to the teams. That was, and I think this highlights just the difficulty of. I don't know if I've ever seen a CTF where there was no unintended vulnerabilities, where there was no solutions that were not different than the original expected ones. But I think that a good CTF holds up in spite of that, and this totally did. Yes, this one was slightly easier than intended, but there were multiple other solutions. I think, and several teams did actually, or at least one of the teams I know, solved it sort of like the expected way. They were changing the rounds and brute forcing the encryption. So, but you always are going to have to deal with a little bit of that. Awesome. Anybody else have key moments, have highlights of things that they kind of wanted to call out? I think we've hit a lot of great moments. What do you got for us, John?
So we didn't realize that this happened during the game, but after the game we found out that SpaceBits scored a flag that they weren't really supposed to score.
Okay.
And so towards the end of the game, we realized that the FTP challenge had only been solved by 3 teams, but SpaceBits, or sorry, Space, my bad, what is it? Space Flag. The challenge. Yeah, the challenge Space Flag had been solved by 4 teams, and considering the FTP challenge was a gateway challenge, that shouldn't have been possible. So we asked them. We said, "Hey, did you?"
So which one is Space Flag? Because I know we've had a couple of different names. Was that
3 at Monty.
3
My
at
bad.
Monty,
That was
I know.
that's our internal
These
name.
names change all
Yeah,
the time. Well,
sorry.
and the team saw the binaries too, so sometimes the binary name was different than the challenge
Yep.
name. It's okay. So
Yeah.
3 at Monty, which is the one that we talked about briefly earlier, right? That's the one
Yep.
where you're like had to have this shared state. You're communicating between these apps. It's a little bit of a crack me challenge,
Yep.
multiple binaries. Okay, so that's the challenge, and you saw the team solve it that shouldn't have had access to it.
Exactly.
All right.
So we asked that team, we said, hey, after the game, we said, hey, did you guys forget to submit your flag for the FTP challenge? And they responded, no, we just took it from telemetry. And we said, what do you mean telemetry? And they told us that apparently another team pwned their satellite to get their flag. To submit it
because
as
you could get it from other teams.
Exactly.
But if you did,
Yeah, they forgot to reset the app afterwards, which would then clear the
Clean out the
telemetry.
telemetry
So
data.
they ended up finding it in telemetry instead.
I think that is a super good hint. A super good hint for teams next year.
Exactly.
That sounds like something that you should keep in mind. That makes
Yep.
a lot of sense. Yeah. So similar to like leaving my payload, like I'm leaking a key from another team in maybe Defcon CTF, right? And I write it to temp, but then a third party can come along and grab it later. Like you got to clean up after yourself. You got to have tidy file maintenance.
We had something similar last year where everyone could read each other's telemetry. So you had to obfuscate your flag.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Custom encryption or XOR
Exactly.
Or something.
Just some simple XOR. And we found one team was just sitting back doing nothing, right? And just waiting for flags to come in on other teams.
Please do have flags.
Telemetry. And even one team was just XORing against a bunch of different values, finding the flag. Yeah. So very similar this year.
Yeah. So watch your logs, watch your
Exactly.
telemetry. It's a lesson for future competitors as well as all the other ones. That's awesome. I hadn't heard that one yet. Anybody else? I think that was an awesome list.
Thanks.
Very cool. Awesome. All right. Well, we are going to do a little bit of a rearranging. We're going to bring in some other people here into the studio because we really want to have a brief glimpse of everybody who was involved in this. Well, not even everybody, because as we mentioned, there were several of the competition team members who aren't here at the final event that worked on some of these challenges. But we're going to try to get the bigger crew in here to talk through what we've been doing. So they're probably around the corner celebrating. Hopefully they haven't totally started celebrating yet. But I do want to thank all of the teams, especially I know some of the teams that were coming in from other time zones. It's a lot of work. It can be really stressful. You're trying to deal with staying awake. So we really appreciate you hanging with us this particular weekend. I know the organizers were making cracks on Twitter about when the gap was situated time zone wise for people who were maybe in Europe, but I'm sure you can appreciate that everyone needed a little rest, even though I know you all may not have had it because you were coming in from a different time zone. So thanks again to all the teams. Congratulations, the competitors did fantastic. You'll probably hear people shuffling in here behind, so don't mind that. We're looking forward really to seeing everybody. I'm probably last time you'll see me over here in this particular set because of course next year for Hackathon 4 we're going to be out there in Las Vegas doing this live with all the teams. Looking forward to seeing them in person, and that'll fix those time zone problems, right? So when everybody's here together in person, we'll be able to get you all hopefully on the same sleep schedule so that you can, and then you can also taunt people when you steal some flag out of telemetry. You can tell the other teams to their face. So I think we've got everybody in here. Hopefully we can get a shot of the team. Looks like we're about set. So we'll toss it over to you, Rachel, to close this out, I think.
Great, and thank you so much, Jordan. I think that's a wrap for Hackathon 3. We had an amazing year. We want to thank all of the competitors who were there to compete for us this year. We had an amazing team, and I want to make sure viewers at home understand this is just some of it. It takes a huge production to put this all together. We owe them so much. This is so much fun for us. Thank you to everyone who tuned in at home. Thank you to this amazing facility who have hosted us for 2 years. I am out of here to continue to learn space faster, and we are so excited to see everybody next year at Defcon for Hackathon 4. Thanks again.